For most of this year, actually, we'll be going through a sermon series as we go through the Sermon on the Mount, probably the single largest block of teaching that Jesus ever gave. And so last week, as we started off in the series, we saw that the defining characteristic of a Christian is one that is honest with their weakness. For it is in their weakness God meets with them. And so today, as we look at second half of what we call the Beatitudes, a series of statements that Jesus makes that describes what a blessed life looks like, we get a picture of how this understanding of a Christian as one who is in tune with and is honest and accepting of their weakness, how this understanding shapes our relationship with the world around us. And what we see is that Christians are defined by a lifestyle or a posture towards life with values that run counter to that of the world's. Christians live by values that run counter to that of the world's. And as I think about this, I don't think there's anybody that captured kind of the fundamental MO of the world that is opposed to that of Christianity better than philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He wrote a book, don't be surprised, he wrote a book called The Antichrist. And in it, he denounces everything about Christianity and what it stands for. And in the book, he defines what is good as, quote, all that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power itself in man, and what is bad as, quote, all that proceeds from weakness. And then he goes on to say, quote, nothing in our unhealthy modernity is more unhealthy than Christian pity. Now that's quite a shocking statement to make. But the more I reflect on what he said, the more I realize that all he was doing was saying the quiet part out loud. If we are honest about ourselves and the state of the world, we know that this is the value system of the world. And if you are truly being honest with ourselves, we know that this is even true in many expressions of what we call Christianity. We live by the MO of the world in our pursuit of power, valuing power, and devaluing all things that show their weakness to us. But to that, Jesus says, happiness or blessedness isn't found in accruing more and more power, but in giving it away. Now, if I'm being honest with you, we could stop the sermon right here and give us like 45 minutes to respond, to search our hearts. Because I think for most of us, we have the value system of the world so deeply ingrained into our being, we don't think twice about it. So when we hear statements like this, we may generally agree with it, but everything in our being runs counter to what we just heard. And so here's what I want us to do. I want us to walk through today's text together and to ask the question, like, how can this be true? These things that Jesus is saying that run so counter to our entire being, how can Jesus say all of these things lead to happiness, the pursuit of weakness? And we're going to examine how this could be true. So the first thing Jesus says is, blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Now, to be merciful is to be compassionate towards people that are in need. It is a posture that one has, especially towards those who are suffering, those who are on the margins, those who are weak, those who are oppressed. And a theologian by the name of Thomas Watson made this very helpful distinction between love and mercy. And here's what he says. He says, love is like a friend that visits them that are well. Mercy is like a physician that visits only them that are sick. Here's what a merciful person does. Here's what a merciful person is like. He or she is the kind of person that when they walk into the room, they instinctively and immediately goes right to those who are in pain and those who are suffering. A merciful person does not approach such people with judgment or frustration, or with even a sense of duty to fix them. But a merciful person approaches these people with understanding and compassion. Why? Because a merciful person, when they see people that are suffering, that are lonely and marginalized, they know what it's like. It's a posture of the heart. It's not an intellectual conviction. It is not a duty-bound obligation that they're looking to live out. It's a posture of the heart that goes right to those people because they know what it's like. You know, when we had our first child, Alan, he was a very well-behaved little boy, toddler going up. And wherever we would take him, we would be proud because all he did when we would take him out to restaurants, he would have his book open and he would quietly read for hours and hours on end. When we would go to school and meet teachers, we had our held up high and we asked politely how he's doing, expecting to hear he's doing fantastic. And we were so proud of our parenting. We thought it must be due to our piety to the Lord and our deep prayer life. And when we would see other children in public places that would act out, we would be embarrassed for them. But for the life of us, we could not understand why they would do such things. And I remember, Helen never did this, I did. I remember silently judging them. Let's just say, however, that things did not stay that way. The first time one of our younger children sprawled out in the middle of a shopping mall, wailing because she did not get the Lego that she wanted to, that she had no capacity to put together herself. And as she wailed on the floor, refusing to get up, going limp every time I tried to pick her up, everything clicked for me. Now, when I see children misbehaving and throwing fits in public, I guarantee you there's not a judgmental bone in my body. I want to run over and help them and have all the love and understanding of the world with them. We ache with the parents. A merciful person sees those that are in need, and they don't see a stranger having experiences that are foreign to them. A merciful person sees those that are hurting and sees themselves in them. That's why they go towards those that are hurting. But a merciful person extends mercy even towards those who will never reciprocate it. You know, when we talk about being merciful, you may have this beautiful picture of extending mercy to those that are hurting, and you're receiving gratitude in kind, and you change their life, and this beautiful interaction that's happening. That's the picture that we can have in mind when we talk about this in theory, but you know that's not how it works in practice. I know some of you in your marriages, in your work relationships, in your friend groups, who tried to do this before. Extend mercy. But you know, merciful people are often taken for granted. Often they are taken advantage of. It's a messy thing to live as a merciful person. You know that. So why does Jesus say, "Blessed are the merciful"? I love the simplicity of the Beatitudes. Because Jesus says, it is the merciful who will be shown mercy. Why does Jesus say that? He says that because it is only the merciful who knows what it's like to be spiritually empty that are ready to receive life as a gift. See, if you're a legalist or a moralist and all you've ever experienced in life is success and you attribute it all to your capabilities and your righteous living and even perhaps your piety, a legalist or a moralist who needs to earn everything can never receive anything as a gift. Remember, I told you being a merciful person indicates a posture of the heart. And if the posture of your heart is, I need to be a good person, I need to be a powerful person, I need to be a successful person to earn everything that comes my way, then you can never receive anything as a gift. Especially the kind of gift that God is looking to give to you. The God who says, you have nothing, but I'm willing to give you everything. And therefore, a legalist or a moralist whose posture of the heart is to have to earn everything can never be truly merciful towards others. They can see people who are hurting as projects, problems to be fixed. But unless you're a person who receives mercy, you can never extend true mercy. God's mercy tells you that it's in your darkest days that His love for you shines brightest. God's mercy is a thing that tells you that you will never be graded according to how good you are, but according to God's goodness. That is the kind of joy that is available for the Christian, but you can only receive it if you know you're weak. And only the weak can truly extend mercy towards others. And only those who extend mercy to others, only those who are merciful, can understand what the book of James says when it says, mercy triumphs over judgment. Do you know the kind of mercy that triumphs over any judgment that comes to you? The negative verdict that your own conscience is trying to lay down on you. You can only truly know that if you're weak enough to say, I need mercy. Mercy is my only hope. And you extend that to others. So that's the first thing. The second thing Jesus says is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And what does it mean to be pure in heart? A pure heart is uncluttered and singularly focused on God. That's what Jesus means. And it's only those people that are able to see God. And I want to clarify something here. Notice Jesus doesn't say, blessed are the pure in thought. He doesn't say, blessed are the pure in your cares and concerns or their behavior. A lot of times when we think about purity of the heart, because of some of the toxic kind of evangelical culture that many of you have inherited from the 90s and early aughts, when you think about purity of heart, immediately your mind goes to being freed from lust. This is not what Jesus is saying. Now, there are other parts of the Bible that talk about sexual purity. We will get there, but this is not what it's talking about. Because again, Jesus doesn't say, blessed are the pure in thought, cares, concerns, or behavior. He says, blessed are the pure in heart. Let me explain to you what this means. This means that you can be singular in your thoughts and cares and concerns and your behavior and be cluttered in your devotions. You can have all of your ducks in a row and going in the right direction, but your heart can be directed somewhere else. That's exactly what Jesus rebuked the Pharisees for doing. He said, you are all clean on the outside, but you're impure, you are dirty on the inside. Pharisees did all the right things before God. They filled their minds with all the right things, and yet their hearts were far from God. But the converse of that can be true. Your life could be a cluttered mess. You could be struggling with all kinds of behavioral issues. Your mind could be filled with all kinds of worries and anxieties, and yet your devotion can be singular. And what Jesus would say is, your heart is pure. The great reformer Martin Luther once put it this way. He said, Christ wants to have the heart pure. Though outwardly the person may be a drudge in the kitchen, black, sooty, and grimy, doing all sorts of dirty work. Though a common laborer, a shoemaker, or a blacksmith may be dirty and sooty or may smell because he is covered with dirt and pitch. And though he stinks outwardly, inwardly, he is pure incense before God because he ponders the word of God in his heart and obeys it. And here's the why I bring this particular point up. I've spoken to many of you that have considered yourself to be Christian for a long time, and you've been a part of the church for most of your life. And I hear so many versions of these stories where many of you would talk about the days when you were younger, when your life was less complicated, when you had less things to worry about. And you point to that season and say, that was a season I felt so close to God. But what happens over time? You grow older, you need to find a job, and you get tangled up in kind of office politics and pursuing careers. Many of you had families since then, and you say, life just got more complicated. And you say, I just have more responsibilities and concerns and anxieties, and I feel so far from God. And many of you long for the days when things were simpler. And quite frankly, many of you, when it comes to our life as a church, are just trying to replicate what you did in college. I understand that heart. But here's what I want to tell you. It doesn't matter how much soot and grime you've accumulated over the years. Because Jesus says, blessed are the pure in heart. All of the dirt and grime don't make you impure. It's a heart that says, though my mind may be filled with so many different worries and concerns and things that I need to worry about, even though my days are filled with one task after another, all of these people that I'm responsible for, even though I have behavioral issues that have developed over time that's hard to break, it's a heart that says, through all of that, I still know that my only hope is God. Though I may not be freed from all of my responsibilities, all the things that I need to worry about and be concerned about, though I may not be freed from all of those things, one part of me is free, and that is my heart, is that in all of these things, all that I am pursuing is towards God. Do you know that's possible in your life? I know many of you are carrying many things in your mind and struggling with many things, but friends, I am reminded of this every single Sunday morning I come to worship and to sing songs of praise with all of you, that we are a church by the grace of God that is pure in heart. That's why you experience the kind of worship you experience every time you come on Sunday. And I don't want to miss the vision of God that is right in front of you. Because you feel as though you need to be freed from all of these cares and concerns if you are to have a tangible, vibrant vision of God. He says, I don't require all of that from you. I know you're busy. I know there are a lot of things on your mind. All I'm asking is for a heart that wants to seek after me. And I will show up in those places. And friends, God shows up every Sunday morning at our church. I don't want you to lose the vision of it. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. But thirdly, It says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Now here, I feel the need to make a distinction here. Listen, a peaceful person, the way in which we commonly talk about it, a peaceful person is one who avoids conflict, right? They see conflict and they say, I don't need to get tangled up in that drama, and walk away. But a peacemaker is one who steps into conflict and works towards resolution. Okay? A peaceful person runs away from conflict. A peacemaker runs into it, not because they love the drama, not because they feel like they're capable of fixing everything. No, they run into it, as we will see, because they belong to God's family. Here's how they do this. Commentator R.T. France put it this way. This is also a posture of the heart. And R.T. France says this: peacemaking implies assuming responsibility against all the odds, risking peacemaking out of a situation of powerlessness, and demonstrating the conviction that in the end, God's kingdom will prevail. Here's what biblical peacemaking looks like. You don't walk in as the powerful person in the room. You don't walk in as the wise sage that is ready to tell what other people do. You are not the CEO walking into a toxic work relationship and leveraging your authority to fix things. That is not the gospel way. A Christian, remember, is one who is in tune with and is living out of the sense of their weakness. So a Christian does this. You walk into a messy situation with no guarantee of a neat solution, but you step into the middle of it anyway. You get your skin in the game. You get invested into the hostility and assume the risk of getting hurt. And if you've tried to be the mediator between two parties that were in conflict, you understand that many times you absorb the hostility of both parties. Is that not often true? And yet you bear it. Why? Because of the conviction that the hostility that you see in front of you is not the way it's supposed to be. Christians should despise the saying that goes, "It is what it is." A Christian has a vision for heaven in which peace reigns, and says every single time there's hostility, hatred, and conflict, the answer will not be found in the world that is constantly going after power, which inevitably leads to conflict and tension. But the ultimate solution lies in those who follow Jesus and enters into it, risking the cost of absorbing the hostility from all parties. Now, that's a difficult life. And to be completely honest with you, in a moment of vulnerability, I love being a peaceful person. I hate drama. I hate being tangled up in conflict. And I try to play both sides and that kind of a thing. But here's why Jesus says only the peacemakers are blessed. Why? Because here's the reason why. Because people that are self-assertive, people that are divisive, and are actively sowing conflict wherever they go, or the people that are passive and cowardly and runs away from difficult issues, or try to rise above them with some sense of moral superiority, bear no family resemblance to a God who is a peacemaker himself. In fact, God saw the mess of the world, and when it would have been the easiest thing for him to do the thing that he did in the time of Noah, start over. What did he do? He entered into the conflict zone. He sent his son, Jesus Christ. And here's what he did, Ephesians 2:14. This is how Jesus is identified. He says, he himself is our peace, who has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. That's just what God does. He sees conflict, he sees tension, he sees hostility, and he refuses to look away. And so will you, if you are a child of God. And here's the joy. Even as you are absorbing the hostility from all sides, and you introduce drama into your life that you may feel like is completely unnecessary, here's the joy that comes. Every time you do so, it becomes a validation deep in the core of your being of who you are, that you are indeed a child of God. And you're reminded of the fact that every time you enter into the mess of others to absorb the cost of that mess, you will remind yourself of the love that God has for you. When you refuse to say, there is that mess and the conflict, it's not worth my time, and walk away. Instead of doing that, if you were to say, no, that is worthy of my time and my effort and even my heartache, I will enter into that mess. Whenever you say that, you will be reminded of the fact that God did the same with you. That when he saw you, even in the worst of the mess that you may find yourself in, that God in Jesus Christ did not walk away. And not at the risk of his life, but at the cost of his life, took that hostility upon his very flesh, so that through his broken flesh, you may be made whole. First in your relationship with God, and also in your relationship with others. See, the more you begin to resemble your Father, the more you take on his priorities. And the more you take on his priorities, the more you resemble him, and the greater the assurance of your heart that you belong to a God who gave himself for you. That's what it means to be a peacemaker. But lastly, I want to spend the rest of our time here together on this. It says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Then it goes on to say, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, it says, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, I have to be clear here, and we've had Christians like this throughout its entire history. There are Christians who are being persecuted for being fools and needlessly fanatical and just straight up annoying to the world around them. That is not what Jesus is talking about. But he says, blessed are you when you are persecuted on account of Jesus. When you are living out of your love for him, out of your ultimate allegiance to him, out of a life that is following him, if you are persecuted for that reason, blessed are you. Here's what that tells us. On the one hand, far less of us are experiencing persecution than we think. Many Christians of this day cry cultural persecution when it is nothing compared to the kind of persecution that ancient Roman Christians experienced, or even many of our brothers and sisters in other countries experience. Okay? Let me tell you, if you live in the United States, you are not experiencing cultural persecution. I'm sorry. But, having said that, others of you are experiencing a lot more persecution than you may think you are. I've spoken to many of you who are business owners. And I know at least some of you that I've spoken to have decided from the get-go to forego any business practices that might bring profit in, but goes against gospel values. You just refuse to do it. And I don't want to single any of you out, but you know who you are. And I know that there are concerns that you have about the sustainability and the viability of your practice or your business long term. What is that? You're experiencing loss, and you are ready to experience loss because you're trying to follow Jesus. Others of you had to say no to relationships that may have looked promising because of your ultimate allegiance to Jesus, because you were looking to follow Jesus. Man, but that person just looked so right. But you said no. And you've experienced loss as a result of that. Jesus says, when you experience loss, especially at the hands of others, because of your love for Jesus, he says, rejoice and be glad. Some other translations put it, and I think rightly so, be exceedingly glad when you experience persecution. How? Friends, in my early years of being a Christian, this was perhaps the biggest riddle. As I've heard of all of these martyrs who died for their faith throughout the centuries, throughout church history, that died with dignity, that died with resolve and boldness, but also with joy, that did not make any sense to me. How can this be true? That when you experience loss for the sake of Jesus, that you can be exceedingly glad. This is how we wrap up our section on the Beatitudes. That is a question that I want to ask as we close. How can we consider ourselves blessed when we're empty? Like if we're truly being honest. When we're constantly giving ourselves away. When we are turning away from the comforts of this world and suffer loss and enter into everybody's mess to absorb. It's like you are willingly taking on all of the unhappiness of the world so that others can benefit from your misery, it seems. How? Two things. Living this way becomes proof of two things. One, of who we are becoming, and secondly, where we are going, okay? Experiencing all of this loss for following Jesus becomes proof of who we are becoming and where we are going. Who we are becoming. What does Jesus say? Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is saying, if you experience loss for my sake, that is proof that you are kingdom citizens, that you belong to the kingdom of God and not of this world. That's why the writer of Hebrews says this, the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. What Jesus is saying is, look, everything that I am about runs counter to the instincts of this world. And therefore, if you live according to my priorities, my values, my mandates for your life, you are going to experience loss. But guess what? The only thing that loss can do for you is further cement in yourself the fact that you belong to me and not to the world. The great preacher, David Martin Lloyd-Jones, says this, the devil will do everything he can to bring persecution into your life, to make you unhappy. But he says, take heart. Because a Christian knows that God never loses. And therefore, God makes even the devil the cause of his blessing. Why? Because a Christian says, the only thing you, the devil, can do to me is to give me further proof that I belong not to this world, but to the God of the universe who loves me and who will love me forever. And I stand on a foundation that cannot be shaken. So every loss you experience for Jesus tells you who you are. That's the first thing. But the second thing, every loss you experience for Jesus proves to you where you are going. Your reward, Jesus says, is great in heaven. I want you to let those words sink into your heart. Your reward is great not on earth, but in heaven. There's a North Korean Christian by the name of, I believe his name is pronounced Ui-tae, and his last name was withheld for safety reasons. His entire family was sent to a very harsh labor camp because of their Christian faith. And when an organization that works with persecuted Christians all around the world asked him, he says something that is so simple and yet sends shivers down my spine. Here's what he said. When I think of going to heaven, my heart begins to be brave, and I have the courage to endure all sufferings. Friends, a Christian is always thinking of the end. This is what our great father in the faith and a pioneer for the gospel movement, the Apostle Paul, said in 2 Corinthians 4. He says, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Friends, this is what sets the stage for the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus describes the defining features of a Christian. Friends, I'm going to tell you the kinds of things that will be taught in the weeks and months to come will be difficult for many of us to stomach because they run so contrary to the way the world works. But I love what Jesus does in setting up his teaching. He starts with the Beatitudes. Before he says, this is how you ought to think, this is how you ought to feel, this is what you ought to do. Before Jesus says any of those things, here's what he does. This is who you are. And this is where you're going. Friends, here's my prayer for us as we go into the rest of the Sermon on the Mount and as you go into your week. My prayer for you is that you learn to cultivate a holy imagination. Imagination that is sanctified. Not the kind of imagination that tries to conjure up realities that are not true. A lot of our self-help books today that do that, right? Visualize. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm praying for you a holy imagination that is sanctified, the kind of imagination that can vividly picture in the heart what is actually true of you. That you have an identity that is stable, that cannot be shaken, that you have a hope for the future that can never be taken away, so that when the circumstances of your life that are around you cave in on you, and you are tempted to go the way of the world in accruing more and more power, the way so many Christians of our day have gone, you say to yourself, what I am seeing with my physical eyes is not the reality of who I am and where I am going. So that you can know for certain in your heart of hearts that come what may, that you belong to God. That your ultimate destination is heaven with its rewards. So that you may be detached from all the things of this earth that are vying for your heart's attention, so that you can give yourself away in weakness, so that your life's goal and vision is to be in service of others, that you may live a life that is willing to absorb the brokenness of this world for its healing. Friends, can't you see? Only Christians serve a God who did that first. And therefore, what is the hope of the world? It's the church. It's the Christian who's willing to be a Christian, who's willing to follow Jesus. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. May the Lord teach us to desire them above everything else. Let's pray.